Oklahoma remains top dog in the NCAA. We finally saw the first 15 of the season. Rhys McClenaghan got a 10 on Dancing with the Stars, and Winter Cup is next week. For those new here, I'm Kensley, the host of Neutral Deductions, a podcast all about men's gymnastics. This is episode 57, where I recap week 5 of the NCAA season, plus Gymternet news.
This is the Neutral Deductions podcast, men's gymnastic news, coverage, and analysis.
So, OU faced off against Stanford again and also against Greenville. But of course, the huge matchup was like this redo of OU versus Stanford at home. And last year, if you'll remember, Stanford beat Oklahoma at home, breaking this really long winning streak. I think it was 17 years that OU had at home. And they ended up getting revenge and getting the win. And so OU was able to take that win at home. They had been beaten by Stanford earlier this season at the Rocky Mountain Open. And of course, that's something to celebrate. But I think one of the other really special things about this meet was the attendance. So they had this record-breaking attendance of 2,149 fans. And I think a lot of people have maybe overlooked the hard work that Mark Williams has put in cultivating a relationship with local elementary schools and with sororities and other aspects on campus to really do the work to bring the fans in. And we see this often in women's gymnastics, where Jordan Weber, when she got to Arkansas, was calling up previous donors and going to the sorority houses. And we saw this with Miss Val at UCLA, and we've seen this at Utah, where the coaches are going out into the community and they're building these relationships and they're bringing these people in so that thousands of people are coming. And I think what's cool about what Oklahoma is doing is they're showing that men's gymnastics can be popular and it can be really interesting and engaging. And with this new format, this 4-up-4 count, these meets are getting shorter. And so it can be a little bit more friendly to maybe that younger gymnast who doesn't have necessarily the ability to sit so long in the stands. So this was really encouraging for me to see. And I hope more coaches will continue to take initiative to go out in the community and do these things to pull people in. And I know coaches don't have, a huge admin budget and don't have a lot of extra time on their hand. And I understand how difficult that is. But it is promising when you see this reward, this payoff for doing the work to be in the community. And so just congratulations to Oklahoma, not only on their win, but also on their attendance as well. Now, the other big mashup for this week was the redo for Michigan versus Illinois. So this was happening at Michigan. So previously, Illinois had beat Michigan at Windy City, but this time it was Michigan who bested Illinois at home. I think that this was probably aided by having both of the U.S. Olympians, Paul Judah and Frederick Richard, back in the lineup. Now, even though they were able to come away with their win, there were some really strange things that happened at this meet, specifically with the equipment. So as you're watching, this was streamed on Big Ten, and after each athlete would go up, the coaches were having to run on the floor and re-Velcro the floor. It was constant equipment malfunctions, very strange. I've never really seen that before, and I hope that they're able to get that fixed before the end of the season. Michigan is hosting the NCAA championship, so maybe they need to get a new floor, have Spieth come out and fix that, but that certainly shouldn't be happening at a meet. The other really odd thing that happened at this meet was almost every single vaulter balked or fell. It was very 2000 Sydney Olympic-esque, and several people online, former athletes, were I wonder if there's something wrong with the equipment. But I was able to talk to some of the coaches on both sides, and both of them were no, our athletes didn't feel like that there was an equipment issue. It just kind of felt like there was an off day. So I don't know if it was, as Gymcastic would say the ghost of Horkina was under the vault or something. But there was definitely something up, and it showed, and it made the competition a little bit wonky. But ultimately, Michigan came out with the win there. Now, Ohio State beat Penn State by just over a point. Army was dominant over William and Mary this week, and then Air Force beat Cal at home. And the one thing I do really want to highlight from this meet with Air Force was Patty Hoops, who scored the first 15 of the season of any athlete on any event and of any international athlete as well. So this is a really, really big deal. Even though the NCAA doesn't quite use the exact FIG scoring, it's still the first 15 of the year. So this is a really big deal. And it should be something that helps boost his confidence going into Winter Cup, because he is going to have to re-earn his spot on the national team. But I think he is poised and in a really good position to do so. Now, in terms of like road to national rankings, you will see that there have been some movement and maybe some like strange things happening. So Oklahoma is sitting at the top of the leaderboard kind of as expected right now. But one of the things that isn't expected is if you go all the way down to the bottom, Nebraska is sitting in 15th with a score of 0. So I want to explain a little bit what is happening here. So after a certain number of weeks, Road to Nationals and the way the NCAA scoring works looks at the average of at least 3 scores, and Nebraska doesn't have that. So Nebraska is currently ranked last. Now, after they compete again, they're going to shoot up the standings. It'll be fine, nothing to worry about, but that's just a little explanation of what's happening there. If you look at event leaders, right now, Cam Nelson is leading on both floor and vault. Patty Hoops is leading on pommel horse. Asher Hong is leading still rings. Logan McCown is leading parallel bars, and Emery Dodonley is leading high bar. And then Ian Sandoval of Illinois is the top in the all-around standings. Now, before we move on from NCAA completely, we need to talk a little bit about the judging that's happening. And this is not about the athletes. I'm going to mention some athletes by name. This is not their fault. I cannot repeat that enough. This is issues with the judging. But there have been some pretty significant issues, and I'm just going to highlight 2 of them today. So the first one is Carson Eshelman of Michigan. So this was at a meet at Springfield a few weeks ago, and he ended up scoring a 14-1 on rings. Well, what's really interesting about this is his ring routine starts from a 4.1. The judges gave him an additional 8/10 in difficulty. Yes, you heard me correctly. 8/10 in difficulty. That's how badly that they messed up his D score. And this just shouldn't happen. Where are the checks and balances? And I'm really curious to know if the judges who were on that panel are going to end up getting any, I don't know if disciplinary action is quite the word I want to look for, because judges are human and need to be able to make mistakes, but definitely need some guidance on this new code of points. Just a little bit disappointing to see. And I think it begs the question of, when you have a score that's that egregious, is it the responsibility of the coach to go and tell the judges, hey, this is really wrong? An 8/10, that could absolutely be the difference in some of these meets. Or do you just take the gift? And I'm really curious to hear your thoughts, judges, coaches, athletes. I would love if you would write in or message me on Instagram. You can email me at neutraldeductions@gmail.com to know if there's a D score that's this wrong, what should be the process? Should there be a new rule where if the difficulty score is off by, let's say, more than a 10th, then the other judge or the other coach of the other team can inquire? What is the process here? So I'm really curious to know your thoughts, and I would love to read a couple of responses on the next podcast. The other kind of really egregious mistake that has come up is Cooper Kim of Stanford on vault this past week at the Oklahoma meet. His vault was scored 4/10 too high. And this is not a layout to Kachev on high bar where it's well, does it get the layout credit, or are we downgrading it to a pike? Like, the vault that he performs is unambiguously that vault. And it's not like there's a question of how much is he turned around. Like, he did the Yurchenko double, and he got 4/10 extra for it. And I just have to wonder, like, what are we doing if there isn't an availability for judges to correct this? And I've spoken to a couple of judges, and they have said, like, sometimes there are these moments where you have these quote unquote brain farts, but there isn't a mechanism for the judge to change the score after it's been input. And at the FIG level, at the brevet level, they're using these touch pads, and sometimes their finger just slips. And the only way for them to get this score corrected is basically for the coach to inquire and it to go to the superior jury. And I just have to wonder, like, we have to have a better system to understand that judges are human, and oftentimes they know that they've made a mistake and they need to be able to own up to this mistake. So anywho, there've just been, women's judging gets a bad rap for handing out tens like candy, but these have been a couple of really egregious errors. Again, not about the athletes themselves. And I'm curious to know your thoughts about how you would fix the judging system with these egregious errors. Moving on to some Gymternet news. So the Baku nominative roster recently came out. And for the U.S., they had 3 athletes on there: Paul Judah, Frederick Richard, and Steven Edorosik. Now, this is just nominative, and I don't think that there's any way that Steven Edorosik is actually going to Baku, because I looked it up and the dates are strictly conflicting with some of his Dancing with the Stars dates and that tour that he's on. So I'll be really interested to see which athletes are actually going to be sent. And once the Baku World Cup happens, we'll get a better idea of what the routine composition is going to look like for this new code of points. So I'm really looking forward to this competition coming up. Now, a couple of really good and interesting things happening at USA Gymnastics. So USA Gymnastics announced today, Wednesday, February 12th, that they have launched their USA Gymnastics Creator Program. And the goal of this program is to offer athletes, former college or elite athletes, the option to gain experience in photography and videography and editorial writing and broadcast or commentary. And I can't tell you what a positive thing this is for USA Gymnastics. I think for so many athletes in the past, they have felt like they have just been tossed aside, and if they don't want to go into coaching or judging, that there's no room for them to remain in the community. And when Lili Leung first took office, one of the things that she talked about in her press conference was that as an athlete, when she graduated, she kind of felt lost and she didn't really know how to move forward or what to do. And one of her goals was to create transition programs for athletes. And we've already seen kind of a baseline of this happening, where Ian Gunther has been allowed to be on the floor and create content, and Evan Manavong has been creating content. And so now they have an official program for these athletes to come in and gain experience. And it is not easy to break into this field, and for athletes to be able to come in and say, hey, I've covered a Winter Cup or a US Gymnastics Championships, is going to go a long way to get them to long-term goals to be picked up by major news organizations. Now, speaking of Winter Cup, there has been an addition to their roster, and that is Brian Solomon of Navy. Not a super well-known athlete, but his parents are really famous. So his mom is Nancy Kerrigan, the U.S. figure skater, and she is married to Jerry Solomon, who is actually the agent for Frederick Richard. So he's an athlete that you should definitely get to know. He does have really beautiful gymnastics, and then of course has this really storied history of famous parents as well. Speaking of Frederick, he has finally told the world that he is launching his new gymnastics line with Turn Gymnastics. And I've known about this for several months and I haven't been able to say anything. So I'm so glad that this is finally out in the open. So on his Instagram post, he said, "I'm making this change for my 10-year-old self who felt awkward in tights and embarrassed to tell people that he was pursuing a girl's sport. And for every kid who still feels that way today, I've made it my goal to change the sport because no young boy should feel these insecurities in a sport as amazing as this one. The world and culture has changed, and now it's time for the sport and uniform to change as well. Thank you to Turn Gymnastics for helping me push gymnastics forward. The new era of men's gymnastics uniforms is coming." Now, I have not personally seen what he is planning on wearing, but what I have been told is that, at least in the original designs, again, I don't know if this is in the final designs, but in some of the earlier designs, that it was not in line with the FIG code and that he would need to take a leotard or kit deduction. Now, if he competes these at Winter Cup, which is the plan, this is not an issue. He has already secured his spot to the US Championships in later this year. And so for him to take this 3/10 deduction is no issue at all. And I'm just very interested to see what it could be, if it's going to be more like jersey-esque. I think one of the things he's got issues with is the tights and the pants. And so obviously watch Winter Cup for the men's gymnastics, but also watch this because we are going to see this design change. And I think it's something that we should be talking about. In women's gymnastics, one of the most popular posts are, "Oh my goodness, what leotard are they wearing and how many sparkles does it have?" And I think it's really cool that maybe there's going to be this innovative change in design for men's gymnastics, and it's something to really look forward to. The final thing I want to talk about today is Rhys McClenaghan of Ireland, Olympic champion. He has been on the Irish version of Dancing with the Stars, and he got his very first 10 of the series a few weeks ago doing the Charleston and the Spider-Man mashup. Guys, he's really good, really, really talented. Sometimes we see gymnasts go on Dancing with the Stars and their coordination doesn't really transfer very well. I've been super impressed with his dancing abilities and his ability to extend and follow direction. I will say it's been a little bit hard to follow. There hasn't been a ton of coverage, at least on the US side, of him being on Dancing with the Stars, and trying to find the videos. The videos go up on YouTube a week late. So it does feel like you're constantly behind. But if you haven't taken a moment to watch any of his videos, I highly, highly recommend it. If you are enjoying Neutral Deductions and what we're putting out, I would love if you would take a moment and go rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. It helps others find Neutral Deductions and learn more about men's gymnastics. Thank you so much to Katie, Phil, and Alana for sending in donations. This has enabled us to buy our flight back from Detroit to Denver after the NCAA championships. We are almost entirely listener supported at this point, and these donations make a huge difference in producing a better quality product for each of you. If you would like to donate, the PayPal link is in every single show note and at the bottom of every article on neutraldeductions.com. If you have any questions, comments, or insider tips, particularly what I talked about earlier with the kind of judging debacle, please email me at neutraldeductions@gmail.com or send me a message on Instagram. That is all for this week. We will see you next time.